my loves. Hello, my loves. Hello, my loves. I had pause and let all of my loves get in there.
Get it.
Welcome to Monique and Cindy's Open Relationship. Hey, Daddy.
Hey, Mama.
What's going on?
Not a thing. A new day.
A new day.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that beautiful?
All day.
Some people went to bed last night
and didn't get back up today.
Shit was different.
It felt so good, they still laying down.
Okay. Now, and some people woke up out their mind.
Okay.
Come on, let's talk about it. All right, y'all. So the title today is the Enlil and Enki effect, why men rule by fear and women's power is forgotten.
That's it.
Okay, I got that out, didn't I?
You got it out.
And the call-in number is 470-282-1802. Now, Daddy, why are we talking about this today?
This is kind of a follow-up in our conversations that we've been having concerning women. You know, why Sidney stands by his wife, why you are having conversations and boycotts, and why we are in the state of affairs where there are Me Too movements and things of that nature because of the men who rule by the utilization of fear, and women's power is actually forgotten.
So this has been going on a long time.
For millenniums upon millenniums upon millenniums upon millenniums.
So it sounded like it was designed that way.
Right. And today when we were talking about Enlil and Enki, this is information that preceded all of the Abrahamic faiths, the Hindu religion, which is the oldest religion. And I'll say this, take the best, leave the rest. This is not us saying this is what it is. This is just information that preceded it when they wrote it in cuneiform text on clay tablets that was provided, and perhaps it will make logical sense out of what mankind has created an illogical definition for as it pertains to faiths, religions, and the way people think.
So when you talk about Enlil and Enki,
yes,
are they before Jesus?
Yes, as we would know it. Their names have been, it's kind of like the story of the Adamu, which were the first worker race of beings that the Annunaki who had created, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but Anu, who was the father of Enlil and Enki, gave Enki the assignment to mine for gold. And they were having a difficult time. It was a bit more tedious than they had expected. So they then created a worker race of beings called the Adamu. The Christian religion had taken the Adamu, so it would seem, since the word Adamu preceded the Christian faith, and they made the first man as
Adam.
Oh,
y'all, don't let me figure some shit out because I'm like, that just excited me.
There it is.
We're going to talk about it, y'all.
We're going to talk about it. And the information that we're getting this from is from the Library of Alexandria. So what we're saying is, don't take our word for it. Do research for yourself, because we live in a day and time in which folks want you to believe what they say, and that's it. Take a look for yourself. Again, Library of Alexandria. Information is by a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Gardner. Just to give you a little insight about Lawrence Gardner, he was a prominent author and speaker in alternative history in the genre of research and writing, whose 8 published works presented often controversial revisionist theories challenging orthodox views of world history. And from 1998 to 2010, Lawrence was a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, and a charitable body which promotes the study of antiquities and history of Scotland through archaeological research. There's more to it, but that's the gist of it. And now we wanted to share some information with you from which he had written to give a little bit of insight as to the Enlil and Enki effect and why men rule by fear and women's power is forgotten.
All right, Enki and Enlil. According to the ancient Sumerian text, the Sumerian god Anu the supreme lord of the sky, the currently reigning Tutlar, head of the Sumerian family tree, had two sons. They were Enki, lord of the earth and waters, whose mother was Antu, and Enlil, lord of the air and lord of the command, whose mother was Kai. These two half-brothers, surprise, surprise, did not get along.
Now, when we talk about Enlil and Enki and these two brothers that didn't get along, I think we know about two brothers who didn't get along, or heard about two brothers who didn't get along in modern day Christianity. And I believe their name was Cain and Abel, just to give a context to some of these things.
Critical to their rivalry, particularly from Earth's viewpoint, was the fact that Enki had been the first of the Annunaki to hazard a trip to Earth to begin a mining operation for gold. When this effort did not apparently produce gold in sufficient quantities, Enlil was brought in, given command, and armed with a new plan, an early version of the new plan. The revised program was to mine gold from the deep mines in the earth.
So the beginning of what we're hearing now is about gold. And ironically, we today still have a fixation with this thing called gold.
Mm-hmm. According to Sumerian texts, as detailed in Genesis of the Grail Kings, during a visit by their father Anu, help me, baby.
He's the archetypal absentee landlord. What basically he's saying is he gave an order, then he rolled out.
Okay. The Anunnaki made a decision. The gods had clasped their hands together, had cast lots, and had divided. Anu then went up to heaven till Enlil the earth was made subject. The seas enclosed as with a loop, they had given to Enki, the prince of earth.
Now, remember the prince of earth title for Enki, because there's another individual that they call the prince of earth who was supposed to be over it, and that was a guy named Satan. So when we check this out, we also hear three people again: Anu, Enki, and Enlil. So that's the equivalent of somebody potentially saying the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But it's just ironic that it's these three. That's just my hypothesis in that regard. However,
sounds fair. However, as Lawrence Gardner points out, Enki was not happy about his brother's promotion because although Enlil was the elder of the two, his mother Kai was Anu's junior sister, whereas Enki's mother Antu was the senior sister. True kingship, claimed Enki, progressed as a, help me,
matrilineal institution. So basically, everything was going through the matriarch, who was the senior, and that was the way things went. Kind of like in Egyptian and African and certain cultures, that's the way it was. And that's the way, that's the way it was.
So went through the female line, and by this right of descent, Enki maintained that he was the firstborn of the royal succession. I am the great brother of the gods. I am he who has been born as the first son of the divine Anu. If there's a philosophy of Enki, it manifests and explains itself in early Mesopotamian and Egyptian thought, where the true creator of the universe was manifest within nature, and that nature enveloped both the Anunnaki and the humans. Nature as the great mother was still supreme despite any patriarchal scheme to the contrary. Admittedly, Enki's claim as his birthright, the one being based on a
matrilineal succession.
Thank you, baby. Matrilineal succession. Essentially, the mitochondria
DNA.
Okay.
Link.
Which is wholly passed through the female line, was in Enki's best interest. But Enki was also the maternal grandfather who came to the aid of Inanna when things went badly during her descent into the underworld.
Now, that's another story regarding Inanna, because if you follow Inanna, she was the princess of love, sexuality. They had information with her in terms of her freedom that extended from homosexuality to homosexuality to transvestite, and that was millenniums upon millenniums upon millenniums ago. And we sometimes think that we are the creators. This is something that's brand new. And she was cast down because of that. And when her teachings kind of went to the side, it was when Christianity came about. And Enki was one of the gods with small g's when she was sent to the underworld that asked for her to be free because it was giving her an opportunity to essentially, he was saying her expressing herself was her right. Why should she be cast down for speaking freely and showing openness?
Whew. Okay, right here. With the arrival of Enlil, however, who was his best interest, must demean the matriarchal line of succession and thus nature itself, everything changed. The great mother was dethroned and replaced by a supreme male, as opposed to a male consort for the queen. The idea of cooperation, as exemplified by the Council of Annunaki making cooperative decisions, was quickly replaced by competition, and harmony was forsaken in favor of subservience. The supreme god became abstract, and any physical connection with human or nature was lost, and thus the link between nature and human also destroyed. When Enlil hit town, there was a whole new deal put into effect.
So when you listen to the two philosophies, it's basically what we see today. There are those who believe in being afraid of God and God is in charge. If you listen to the stories in the Bible, if you listen to all the stories, you find women seem to be in a position where they are subservient. They take a back seat. Listen to the stories. How many stories do we hear about important Black women or important women in general in our history versus the importance seems to come from man? His information that started before all of the religions that we know in modern day history that speak to where it all started. And then you have the Enki effect, who's saying the same nature that created the gods, it happens to be the same nature that created human beings. And these are gods with small g's.
Well, wait a minute, Daddy. When you say gods with small g's, what is that?
Well, people look at God as there's the God with the big G, but in ancient times, people they, like with the Egyptians, there were many gods that they had: the god of this, the god of that, the god of the sun. And what in actuality, when you hear the description and you listen in more detail, these beings were not really gods. They were advanced, they were beings with advanced technology that to someone who fire is essentially brand new to them and is an advanced technology to them. Now imagine seeing a ship flying above you, and they refer to them as flying boats. Ezekiel referred to it as a wheel and a wheel. Oftentimes you'll see the wheel being drawn vertically and then one going horizontally around it, when in actuality, if you are living in the times of antiquity, if you see a circle of lights inside of a circle of lights inside of a circle of lights, that would appear as a wheel inside of a wheel. So what they were actually not being able to convey is nuts and bolts technology. As Giorgio Tsoukalos from Ancient Aliens would say, they were unable to define it, so they defined it in the best way they possibly could.
All right, y'all. Okay, I left off right here. Okay. According to Lawrence Gardner, the dominant tenet of the New Thought was based wholly on the utmost fear of Enlil, who was known to have instigated the Great Flood, or else acquiescent in not warning the humans or making any attempt to save them, and to have facilitated the invasion and destruction of civilized summer. Here was a deity who spared no mercy for those who did not comply with his dictatorial authority. Abraham had experienced the vengeful Enlil firsthand at the fall of Ur, and he was not about to take any chances with his own survival. He was even prepared to sacrifice the life of his young son Isaac to appease the implacable God. Genesis 32, 2:9. What is this?
The Oriental Scholar.
The Oriental scholar Henry Frankfurt summarized the situation by making the point that those who serve Jehovah must forego the richness, the fulfillment, and the consolation of life, which moves in tune with the great rhymes of the earth and the sky.
So essentially, he's conveying that those who are complying with Jehovah, who many look at as a God with a large G, have lost in translation that Jehovah stems from Enlil's teaching, where he was the superior being. But when you understand that he was the offspring of Anu, who was a space traveler essentially, and their goal was to mine for gold, and the brother of Enki, again, over time, things get lost in translation.
Is that Bromley? Bromley has noted that we therefore find Enki as the reputed culprit who tried to teach early man Adam the way to spiritual freedom. This suggests that Enki intended his creation, Homo sapiens, to be suited for earth labor, but at some point he changed his mind about using spiritual enslavement as a means. From a biblical perspective, it was Enki who, with the critical assistance of his half-sister, Ninki, aka
Ninkersai.
Thank you, baby, created Adam and Eve. It was Enlil, on the other hand, who created Eden. Enki was the serpent in the garden who urged Adam and Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree to knowledge of good and evil, which was infinitely beneficial to their spiritual growth. It was Enlil who drove them out of Eden, while Enki was there to clothe them. It is worth noting that Zechariah Sitchin claims that the biblical word for snake is Nahash, which comes, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
The biblical word for snake is Nahash, which comes from the root word nish, and which means to decipher, to find out. In other words, Enki, the god of wisdom.
So Enki was the god of wisdom. So let's just play it back from a logical standpoint, because we oftentimes don't want to make it seem as if the aspects of religion is logical. We made it illogical, but when you read texts that preceded the Bible, you start realizing that there's a lot of logic to it, and that, again, the prince of the earth is who folks refer to as Satan, which I refer to as a space alien technologist advancing nations. That's how I refer to Satan. And Earth that we live in is an experimental area reserved to harvest, because you see, at one time there were multiple species of being. From the before the Homo sapien, there was the Homo erectus, then there was the Cro-Magnon, there was the Neanderthal, actually prior to that, and many others. But again, what Enki was saying was, he came from and they came from the same nature, the same natural process in which we as human beings came from. And he did not want to use spirituality as a way of controlling the minds of the people, whereby Enlil was saying, nah, that's how we gonna get down and make this thing happen. So when we start paying attention to the story of Adam and Eve, if we look at it, how would we feel about a father who birthed his children, left them alone in the woods, not allowing them to be aware of the fact that they are not naked, but then someone came along and said, if you eat off of this tree of knowledge, not only will you know that you are naked, but you will have true knowledge. But the person that is providing them with the true knowledge has been condemned as evil. Why? Because Enlil conveyed, if you do not follow me, you will be punished. So this is the fear factor that has come in with not following things that are illogical. Because again, We would go to jail nowadays for not allowing our children to be clothed. We would go to jail nowadays if we had a problem with our children not being given an education and we had an opportunity to give them an education. So the person that we demonize that's trying to free you has been perpetuated today, because today, look at Muhammad Ali. He was a demon. Why? Because he didn't want to fight against no Viet Cong. He didn't want to fight against nobody, but people was like, but this is America, you gotta fight. But it didn't make sense. Look at Martin Luther King. Man, you gonna get us killed out here trying to fight for our freedom. See, you getting demonized because you're going against the power. There's a woman by the name of Monique out there who's saying you gonna get demonized. Don't you know they're really powerful? You should be afraid of them. So this is not brand new. There's stories upon stories upon stories. But it also speaks to when you don't hear, and again, someone says, oh my God, they're advocating devil worshiping. When you listen closely and you read the story of Enlil and Enki, the thought of a devil has been created for you to be unaware of what you think that God is based upon these writings. Again, this is not something that I say definitively. This is just history. This is just history that's being retold. It's up to you to take the best and leave the rest, and then at the same time associate that with what we're dealing with today. And if it doesn't make sense to you, it's okay, because we're of the side of Enki. You don't have to be on our side, because our side is not our side. We're just on the side of being free to think as you will, not being bossed into doing something that you feel uncomfortable with because you're afraid of being punished. It's just interesting to think that there are many people who go to church simply because of the fear of going to hell. Not because they want to go to church, but because they are afraid of the punishment that they will get. And for us, it's more important for our children to do the right thing, not because of the fear of punishment, but because it's the right thing, if that makes sense.
All in the work. But you know what, though, Daddy? I think there is a fear of that freedom.
Yes.
It's almost like we've been programmed to follow. And if you don't follow, then we are going to demonize you because you're going against how you've been programmed.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna keep. Where did I go off? I'm right here. Now I gotta tell you, I had a little tickle. Okay, as I was reading, and then you had started explaining, because remember one night we was watching the TV. And there was some religious people on there, and somebody would read. He'd be like, "All right," and then he
right. So and then when you see the demons, you will know the demon, because he will come down and strike thee in the ass. Bam.
Cow. Oh, that tickled me, Daddy. Okay, here we go. In time of Noah, it was Enlil who either created the great deluge, flood, as a means of wiping out mankind because they supposedly made too much noise, or else refused to warn the humans or do anything to save them or help them to save themselves. Enki, on the other hand, apparently against orders of the Annunaki, who Enlil now controlled, provided the boat plans for Noah to build his ark and thus save him, his family, and likely a fair number of helpful artisans and their families. Enki included as well the seed of other living things, a natural kind of thing to do.
So when you listen to it, during the times of this text, before the Christians referred to him as Noah, his name was Zasudra, not Noah. And again, this flood story pre-existed the Christian religion. So again, what we're told is that God spoke to Noah and Noah only. But somehow Noah by himself created the world of people of different denominations, of different colors, from different places, from all around the world, just this one cat. But right here, you're reading from the ancient Sumerian text or information provided from it, where Enki not only told Noah, but other families, other artisans, which would make sense because it's a natural thing to do to want to save the lives of human beings. Because if it only was Noah and his woman, that's a lot of fucking.
Get that.
Like, that's a lot. And then whatever happened to the inbreeding effect, where all of these people are sleeping with all of these people that are sleeping, they're all from the same family, it begins not to make sense. But then when you hear there were other families who were included, however, Enlil took the credit for Noah. And the reason why he destroyed, allegedly, Enlil created the flood, because he was tired of mankind's noise.
This is, for me, the first time that it's made sense. Because as a child, going to church, not often, and never with my father. My mother said she was Catholic, not because she believed it, but just because that's what you told she was.
Right.
I didn't understand that, because as a child, you go there and they're speaking a language you don't even know what they're speaking. Nobody could translate it for me, and they have the little smoke thing that just didn't connect.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to the churches where I remember I went to a real holy church one time, and they was running down the aisle real fast, and well, that scared the shit out of me. And I was with a guy named Byron Franklin. And Byron Franklin held my hand, and we just laughed because we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it still frightened me to see that didn't connect.
Right.
Then I went, like, I've gone to all these different churches, and I'm like, y'all, this still don't make sense, because this sermon keeps being about $1. Everywhere I've gone to, it came back down to getting some money. So this is the first time that when you start explaining it to me, it was beginning to make sense. All right, okay. Where did we leave off, Daddy? Let's see. Okay, right there. In the Samaritan text, we have the stories of Enki and Enlil, and for the most part, there's portions devoted to each. But in Genesis, Enlil seemingly reigns supreme. Enlil knew early on that a pound of good public relations effort is worth a ton of truth.
So in essence, if you publicize it and you say it enough, it becomes true. It's not that it has to be true. It's that it becomes true because enough people have passed it on. For instance, we live in a world in which I know since the 70s, when I first heard about Pluto, they said it's the furthest planet from Earth, right? But now they call it a white dwarf. What? I'm in no position to argue with it one way, whether it's a white dwarf, whether it's a black dwarf, whether it's a planet, whether it's a meteorite, because that's not what I do. So we begin to take the opinions of people who are in a position to view it, and then if they pass the word, they said the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. When's the last time you timed light?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to take their word for it. So if you read the book with the timing in it, you're passing on the verbiage that you've been told, but what are you basing it on? So if you only know about Christianity, if you've only been told that you are a Catholic, if you've only been told you are a Democrat, then what else would you be until the Enki effect comes into play and you begin to be a free thinker? See, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian, Jewish, Islamic, a Democrat, or Republican. The problem comes in is, were you told this what you were, or did you decide for yourself this is what you were going to be? And all we're saying is, decide for yourself. Decide and understand when you're listening to this that there is a thought process in this universe that we all came from nature. The beings that, because interestingly enough, when you think about the religions that we live in. And I would ask you to pull up in your little phone devices and iPads, pull up Pope praying to Black Madonna. And ask yourself, when you see the Pope praying to this Black woman and Jesus is to the right of this Black woman, you're left when you see it. But you see a white Jesus all the time, you say, well, what? And I'll repeat it because somebody said, say it again. I'm going to say it again.
Give it to him.
Pull up on your electronic device, Pope praying to Black Madonna.
Yes.
With a Black Jesus. And I don't mean red bone. I don't mean brown skin. I mean, they were dark-skinned people. And if you look at that picture of Jesus sitting next to the Black Madonna, it closely resembles the depiction of Jesus, which was the first known picture in 3 AD of Jesus. And you'll see that this being was a dark-skinned man with closely cropped hair who was short, and they said looked older than he actually was. And then one would ask, how did Jesus end up white? So when you say if they can change the actual color, the physicality of this person, is the word potentially not accurate as well?
Come on, y'all. And just for me, it makes me think for myself.
You got to.
It makes me say, wait a minute, you want me to follow something just because you said it, but you can't really make this shit make sense? Okay, where did we leave off, baby? Okay. Abraham and his descendants served Enlil and followed his precepts. Is that precepts?
Yes.
Okay, precepts. The Egyptians, on the other hand, were Enki's proteges, and based on food management practices during the devastating droughts around the time of Jacob and Joseph, were doing a lot better than Enlil's followers. Obviously, Noah backed the right horse in that Enki shared boat plans with the righteous fellow, whom Enlil later claimed as his own. But at one point, circa 2000 BCE, now that's before Christ entered?
I guess existed.
Oh, okay. I said before his ass entered.
Before he entered. That's the same thing. Before he entered doing the same.
Come on now.
Okay then.
But at one time, circa 2000 BCE, all hell broke loose. An all-out war of Enki's humans against Enlil's humans, complete with all manner of diplomatic subterfuge?
Yes.
Subterfuge in the mix. Sodom and Gomorrah took the brunt of the action and were destroyed by nuclear weaponry. They were A-bombed. The decision for this, however, was not, as you might have expected, due to Enlil's instigation. Instead, it was due to the actions of his sons, Ninurta,
and
Ningal.
Yep.
And Ningal. The radioactive fallout of their actions then resulted in the final destruction of the Sumerian civilization circa 2000 BCE. Curiously, this event in the annals of Earth turned out to be something of a Waterloo for Enlil. Not that the guy, DBA God, fled the scene, but thereafter the idea of unilateral action was a bit more constrained. Enlil was no longer the undisputed lord of the command among his peers. Which might be just as well. As Lawrence Gardner phrased it, this muddled and unparalleled concept of Jehovah being right when he was wrong, honest when he was dishonest, was born out of inherent fear of his vengeful power and unbounded wrath. Whether as Jehovah in Genesis or as Enlil in the Mesopotamian record, it was he who had instigated the Semitic invasions, which led to the confusion of tongues and the fall of Sumer. It was he who had brought about the devastating flood, and it was he who had leveled the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, not because of their wickedness as related in Genesis 18-19, but because of the wisdom and insight of their inhabitants as depicted in the Coptic paraphrase of Shem. It was Jehovah who had removed the Israelites from their homeland and sent them into 70 years of captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar. By the king Nebuchadnezzar II and his 5 Babylonian successors down to King Belshazzar.
So in essence, when you get a chance to look at this yourself, it's almost saying that these people who are commenting on this are essentially saying the person or the entity that you believe to be a god, the name is a descendant from a space traveler who used power in order to control man, and fear to control man, and power to lessen the power and the value of women. And all I would ask is, and we would ask is, look at the environment that we live in today. Do you see any similarities to the techniques that are used and to what's happening today? Now, somebody say total blasphemy and mockery. We get it. Because if you've been told again and again and again and again that this is the way things are, because as we sit here and read this, I can't sit there and tell you that everything that we're reading is 100% accurate because I wasn't there. But it's ironic that the information that came much later is very similar to the roles that were played by these beings that came about before them. Again, I've never seen Jesus firsthand. I can't. But I know what it is to see what we would call UFOs on multiple occasions. I've not seen the videos that people have had from around the world where they said they saw Jesus firsthand, and here's a picture of Jesus walking down the street. But I've seen pictures of UFOs and that they've seen in space, and people doubted those. But you believe in a word with no proof, because we've been told you must believe, you must do as you're told. And I'm not here, and we're not here to tell you not to do as you're told. We're here to say to you, investigate what it is that you believe. What it is that you believe. So, and somebody said, I'm tickled. This reminds me of preacher while the person reading. We thought the same thing. We thought the same thing. But you can't be sitting here and one don't say shit because it ain't right.
But I'm going to tell you why, though, because I appreciated the way that it was broken down for me. Because like I said, this is the first thing that's made sense. That simply made sense. Now, y'all know I was having a hard time reading these goddamn ancient words, okay? But I appreciate the fact that when I begin to look at it for myself and you start saying, well, wait a minute, the shit that they talking about right here is what it is today, because we do what? We fear people that we believe are powerful. For whatever power is, we fear that.
We fear that. And the other day we were watching this show with Stephen A. Smith and Brother Max Kellerman, and they were talking about and Max Kellerman actually expounded about it in a bit more depth than Stephen A. Smith, in reference to the white privilege that transpires on a daily basis. And his feelings were that white privilege should not be reduced, and that people who are white should not have white privilege. He believed that not only should they have it, but it should be given to everybody unilaterally, which makes sense because the cut privilege is the cut out opportunity. But he felt that you should not just be given that opportunity to a specific group. Well, the way that this power structure has been designed, only a specific group are supposed to have it. And interestingly enough, some of the poorest people that I've ever met in my life are some of the deepest believers in the church. And people will say, but it's God testing your faith. And perhaps that's what it is. But the question I would ask is, why, when you read something about Enki saying that we all come from the same nature, like, why would we not come from the same nature as the gods that, again, with the small g, because if you look at the Hopi tribe, who believe they come from a specific star system, when you look at the Dogon tribe, who believe they come from Sirius B, everything that if you pull up on your electronic devices, UFOs leaving Earth, UFOs entering Earth, UFOs entering the sun, UFOs leaving the sun, Jesus coming down, Jesus rolling out, Jesus leaving. There are no pictures of these beings. Now, don't get us wrong. We believe in spiritual beings' existence. You can look back to the time of existence and you see in the Egyptian pyramids the spirit leaving the body. Something has to fill the body. However, what created us and how we were colonized here on earth was not something supernatural, because the craziest thing is the Annunaki, who were given credit for creating man, they utilized the beings that were here prior to man, which means that there was a history prior to their existence that we have no knowledge of. They just inserted their DNA into the beings that happened to be here already. So our point is, we don't know the history of this world, but what we do know is what's going on in this world is similar to the history that is being spoken about clearly here in a manner that, and at a time that precedes our modern day religion. And we just say humbly, take a look at it for yourself. Take a look at it for yourself, because somebody may say spiritually and religiously, we're being confused. I think we as a people, we have been confused, because there are those that said Copernicus was right. We are the center of the universe, and the sun itself travels around us. But they's about to kill Galileo's ass because he said, no, I've been watching things, and I noticed that we are traveling around the sun. So we are not the center of existence. And the reason why that we were considered special and we were supposed to be the center of the universe is because we were supposed to be looked at as the important ones. This is the reason why even today, I heard Madeleine Albright say the other day while being interviewed by Chris Cuomo, that America is the most important country in the world. I feel uncomfortable with that, because if America is the melting pot, how could we be the most important country in the world when the reality is all the people from different parts of the world happen to be here and they have significance where they are? It is this thinking that makes us say, God bless America, as opposed to saying, God, why don't we please bless the world? And that way, the people who are our enemies can become our friends. But we're worried about dominating. We're worried about being the best. And women, we need you to remember and to look inside yourself to what's innate to you. And that's being nurturers. That's being beacons for freedom, not adopting the ways of man. When I see books like Act Like a Lady, but Think Like a Man, tell me about the woman who created the atom bomb. Tell me about the woman and all the women that created weapons of mass destruction. Tell me about the numerous women in the society that we are in today that have gone on mass murdering sprees. You can only name a few. Because women are about preserving life, not about taking people's lives. And we need to look within, and the way in which we could save the world is we need to put women on a higher plane than they are, so that they can begin to believe in themselves. Because when you hear women who are feminists, and you have women saying, you crazy, they're not crazy. Somebody may say they may have gone overboard, somebody may say underboard, whatever, but there's a reason why you have to be a feminist, because women are dehumanized all the time. Their clitoris are removed by the men. They are demeaned. They are second-class citizens. And it doesn't matter if they are black, white, Asian, or whatever. Look at the world in which we live in. Listen to the stories that you hear. They're dominated by men who are heroes, but they don't speak about the women who have brought them into the world for them to be heroes in the first place.
And that goes to Daddy the Bible. Who are the women in the Bible? Who are they?
When you
There are a
hear
lot of women in the Bible.
and a lot of women in the Bible in comparison to the men.
There are a lot.
Right. But
Well-
in comparison to the men, when you have to ask,
Right. Here's
where are they and who are they in comparison to men, there's no comparison.
I'm not a Bible reader, and I can run down Abraham, Joseph,
You gonna do it?
baby, I'm gonna try now. Peter, Paul. You can run them. I mean, you can run them down. The only woman, and this is because I'm not a Bible reader, so again, I can't speak on how many women are in there. But all the churches I've ever gone to, I've never, not one time, heard one preacher never speak about a woman in the Bible.
Turn to Agnes 23:10.
And tell me about her.
Tell me about her.
And again, I can't say that they're not in there because I'm not a Bible reader. But the churches I've gone to, I've not heard any pastor, as they call themselves, or bishops, or whatever title they give themselves, say, today we're going to speak about this sister. And when you come off the Bible, right, and you start seeing movies like Hidden Figures, and you start reading things about Georgia Gilmore, and you know about a lady named Lucille Bogan, and the list goes on and on and on, and you're saying, well, they did a movie on a brother, Jeffrey Wright played him. Gabrielle Union was his wife, Cadillac Records.
Mm-hmm.
Cadillac Records.
Muddy Waters.
Muddy Waters.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And they should have done a movie on Muddy Waters. But there were so many women during that time.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many women during that time that we'll never get a chance to meet because, again, whenever was it like they're just as important.
Right. And when they're talking about women in the Bible, what is their significance? Like, for instance, when they say research on your phone the book of Lilith, well, when we talk about Lilith, the reason why she's oftentimes not spoken about was because she turned Adam's ass away. And then when you hear about Eve, you hear they essentially are dry snitching that Eve is the reason why women had the pains that they had. Eve was the one who gave the apple to Adam, okay? So dry snitchingly, it was as if she was the cause of all these problems. Listen to the name, men and woman. Now, if you take the W-O and add an E to it, that's woes, okay? Okay? Now, that may have no significance, but maybe it does. But if you listen to the strength and the significance as you speak to women in general, their stories are often put to the rears for the stories of men.
You know, I appreciate some of the babies in the room, and they're giving me the names of the women. And so far, I've seen 3. Rebecca, of course, Eve.
Someone said Lilith. I saw Persila. I'm sure there are a lot of names, but how many names and titles are like the book of Luke? How many are there? Any women?
Books. Is there a book of Ruth?
They said there's a book of Ruth.
There is a book of
They said it's a book of Ruth. Now, that sounds like the one woman that made it in. That she was Oprah. Okay, she was,
bring her ass in here.
Right. Let's get the books of all of these women that you can see in the book. Now, is the book of Ruth in the Bible?
Yes.
So when we could turn to the book of Ruth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and how many books are like that?
But see, here's the thing though, in my humble opinion, and like you say, Robin, well, there are women in the Bible. It is. But how are those women spoken about in the Bible? Because again, and some of y'all in the room can answer, when y'all go to church on Sunday, how often are these women spoken about? Again, I'm not a church goer, so I can't, I don't go every Sunday, I can't. But the times that I went, I don't remember anyone saying turn to any book of any woman. I didn't even know they were in there. So now at 50 years old, I'm finding out something new when people say, well, no. There are women in the Bible.
And then it says, then you see someone says, but they're not spoken about often. And the question was, why not?
Why not?
Because again, if you're looking at this information, it speaks to, and again, take it, leave it, may not make sense. It does make sense because it's almost like the flower doesn't grow the same day in which you plant the seed. So sometimes the seed has to be planted. There's other information that transpires in your life that they got to water that seed. Then the sun has to come out and you may never get it and may never believe it. Because I have to reiterate, I can't take everything that I read to you as having transpired exactly the way they said. However, the interesting thing is there's more of an explanation that comes about where you hear that these beings are coming to Earth and colonizing the planet, and then you can actually go and see UFOs coming to Earth and leaving Earth. And the beings that were referred to as angels, and when you see the halos over their head, I often wonder, was the halo indicative of the ship that they had come out of, and this is what came about? And then they drew it in their image, like Jesus was drawn in the image of, was that Da Vinci's lover? I believe it was Da Vinci's lover. I had that information. But again,
It was a different artist.
Yeah, I think it was a different artist.
Not Michelangelo. It was a different artist.
It's a different artist, but at the end of the day, this was taken, the image that we see of Jesus today is an image that was created by an individual for another living individual, and we take that as fact. And we overlook what Jesus really looked like, and then you hear people saying, and it happened to be his lover. And the interesting thing is, you'll then hear people say, well, why does the way Jesus looked even matter in the first place? And then you say, well, if you want to ask that question, then ask it to yourself, then why was Jesus made white when Jesus was obviously a person of color and he was black? And someone could say, perhaps it would be very difficult to ostracize people of color as being less than if the very Jesus that you were praying to looked like the people that you were ostracizing, versus you're praying to a white Jesus because that keeps you in line with what I believe it's Ephesians 6:5 said. You should pray and pray to your earthly master as you do your heavenly master, or have regard for him. I'm sure I'm misquoting it, but at the end of the day, this is why it may matter. But once again, it's the process of trying to control your thoughts. And again, we're not looking to control your thoughts. We're saying, be where you are, believe in what you believe in, but believe in it because you believe in it, not because you were told to believe in it.
You know, one of my favorite TV shows of all times, and I can watch that show after I've seen every episode, but I watch it like it's the first time, and that is Good Times. I can watch Good Times over and over and over again. Before James passed, after James passed, all of that, right? But the one episode that subliminally could have kicked our ass was when Michael drew that picture of Black Jesus.
AKA
Ned Wino. But when you describe Black Jesus, you said his hair was crinkly, looked older than he was, very, very dark. Well, that looked like Ned Wino because Ned Wino had crinkly hair, looked older than he was because he was a drunk. That liquor made him look old.
Right. And correction, JJ drew Black Jesus.
I'm sorry, right. JJ drew Black Jesus. Michael gonna hang it up.
That's right.
When they hang up the picture of Black Jesus, y'all remember this, right? Florida says, you got to take that down. Because the only Jesus I know is that Jesus. And that was that white man with them blue eyes and blonde hair. Now keep in mind, when Good Times was on at that time, there were not, you could count on your hand how many black shows it was, and there may have been one, Good Times. So there wasn't a whole lot for us to look at.
Mhm.
So now you have millions of us watching this show. And in that moment, we hear Florida Evans, because it wasn't Esther Rose who's playing a part. We hear Florida Evans, but Florida Evans was real to us.
Mhm.
And we hear her say, don't you put that Black Jesus up in here.
Mhm.
It is that white Jesus that has to be in here.
He was good luck though.
So, baby, listen, shit got to happen. James was winning at the pool table and think, but just the poison that we've been fed and are still willing to feed one another about what we believe it to be. And I think that's why we still have a problem with putting value on us as Black people, as Black women, because it.
And as people of the world, because when we stop looking at ourselves in just the physical space and look at ourselves from a standpoint of the spirit that is within us, then that's going to transcend color for what is right. And that when we start trying to look at folks, because nowadays this Facebook, nowadays the Instagram, you got people on there that someone would assume was a redneck from the backwoods, and they sitting there trying to tell you that the white man is trying to keep you from understanding who they are. And the reality is, it's not just the white man. The men come in many different shades and colors. The men, I got an interesting email from a gentleman who's very knowledgeable and historical, and he said, it's interesting, I hear many people of African American descent speak in reference to they come from kings and queens, but ironically, it was the kings and queens who sold the Black people away. Now, is that true? Yeah, it's true. So we can't get caught up in the color, though it's very easy to do because color has gotten us caught up.
Mm.
But the reality is, when we start looking within, because you can't tell me you haven't met somebody that was Black that got on your goddamn nerves, and somebody that did not look like you, did not know your culture, but you got love for them. It's not because you connected based upon the aesthetics of who you are. That is the superficial. You connected on the spiritual aspect of who you are. So the things that we talked about today were not things that I say, this is absolutely what it is. It could just potentially be a reason. But at the end of the day, we all come from nature. And one thing that is natural to us is love. One thing that everybody needs is respect, decency. And we need to stop getting in a space where we're thinking we're better than, and start thinking about, are we the best that we can be? And when we do that, will the religions really matter?
Mm.
Because if God is love, as you say, and you are loving, then you are in line with God, which is natural. That just ended it like that.
Baby, listen here. That's it. And that's all.
And that's it. And that's all. So again, I think it's about that time, baby.
For us to say, I'm Run DMC and J Master J.
That's what you're gonna do?
Okay, baby.
All
I
right,
was just
baby.
gonna put it on there.
Yeah, that's really right.
I want to say thank you for introducing me to it, because it's something to walk around not knowing or feeling like, I know that ain't right, but what is?
And what's right is, we can't dispute you, and the reason why we gave you this information and for reveal is not to say this is what you should be believing in. We're giving you this information to say, do you see how confusing it can be? So why don't we believe in the things that we can grasp? And that is love, that is respect, and that is when you see inequalities, when you see disrespect, when you see the opposite of love being given, be vigilant enough, be brave enough to speak to it. And there's a way in which to do it. But if you don't do it, you understand why, and perhaps it is the Enlil and Enki effect.
On that note, y'all, we want to thank y'all. We want to thank y'all for tuning in every time y'all show up, giving us your ears, your hearts, and your mind, because you could have been somewhere else doing something else. And we want y'all to know now that the Monique and Sidney Open Relationship Show is on our own YouTube channel, Monique Worldwide. So y'all can go check it out. Tell a friend, tell another friend. We thank y'all. And like my daddy always says, the mind is like a parachute.
It's no good unless it's open.
We love y'all.
For free.
Bye, my babies.